Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, I'm going to do William and Mary's land acknowledgement and William and Mary's statement on slavery. William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherahn-Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Potomac, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members past and present. William and Mary's statement on slavery and its legacies. The Board of Visitors acknowledges that William and Mary enslaved people, exploited them and their labor, and perpetuated the legacies of racial discrimination. The board profoundly regrets these activities, apologizes for them, expresses its deep appreciation for the contributions made by the African and African-American members of its community to the vitality of William and Mary then, now, and for all time coming, and commits to continue our efforts to remedy the lingering effects of past injustices. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Dr. Juwan Johnson, the Mellon Foundation Fellow for the Lemon Project. And this is our second installment of the Summer Sankofa Genealogy Workshop Series, and I'm so excited about this. This is wonderful opportunities for us to retool or to tool to dive deeper into our family history. Tonight, I have the pleasure to introduce Ms. Renate Yarborough Sanders, who is our speaker for tonight. She is a descendant of formerly enslaved ancestors, enslavers, and free people of color. She authors 2 blogs, Into the Light and Genea-Related, and produces a mostly African-American funeral programs online database. Renate is a member of the National Genealogical Society, the North Carolina Genealogical Society Publicity Director, the Afro-American Genealogical and Historical Society, member of the National Editorial Board, and Vice President, and also she is the newsletter editor for the Hampton Roads chapter. The Wake County Genealogy Society and the Tyrrell County Genealogical and Historical Society. Renate co-hosts Let's Talk North Carolina Genealogy, an online platform and YouTube show presenting genealogy programming and virtual events for North Carolina researchers. And she has served as panelist and guest on numerous web shows and podcasts. Renate has provided genealogy education for several institutions of higher learning, businesses, descendant groups, and is the instructor for the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute that's taking place this week. Her research has been featured on PBS Radio and in the National Geographic cover story and also podcasts. Currently, Renate is engaged in researching descendants of enslaved persons owned by Wake Forest University, then college. She lectures on a variety of genealogy topics, but specializes in teaching beginning and intermediate research methodology and sharing specific techniques for researching ancestors of color, both pre and post-emancipation. She's a retired elementary school teacher, mother of 2 daughters, and grandmother of 3 beautiful granddaughters and a granddog. Without further ado, let's welcome our speaker for tonight, Ms. Renate Yarborough Sanders.
Thank you so much, Juwan. It's so nice to be back with the Lemon Project and William and Mary again. And said granddog is just to the right of me, so if you hear any strange noises, I'm going to apologize in advance. But thank you to everyone who's here tonight. And I'm going to go ahead, and there's the Air Force or Army or somebody going over, so I'll apologize for that too. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, get rid of the floating panel. And are you seeing my screen? You seeing my screen, Juwan? Uh-oh.
Yes, we're seeing it.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover tonight. I am going to be discussing researching free people of color in Virginia and North Carolina with a specific focus on the years between 1800 and 1865. And I have, get rid of that. Okay. All right. So, free people of color. In this presentation tonight, we're going to focus on just learning a little bit more about who this group of people were, focusing on some of the demographics of this population, talking a little bit about what their lives must have been like, and talking about laws that were put in place that really are the determining factor of what their lives were most likely like. And then we will spend the bulk of the rest of the presentation where I'll just be sharing some of the different types of records that you can use to research free people of color who may be on your family tree. So by 1860, over 10% of African ancestry people in the United States were free Blacks or free people of color, many of whom had mixed ancestry with Native Americans and whites. And give me just a second, I'm going to turn my camera off if I can, or I'll just make it so I can't see it. Okay. And I love to share this graphic that was put out in 2008 by Erin Bradford. She got it from the University of Virginia Library, and I can never find it online currently, so I'm so glad that I've had it since then. And it shows the growth in the population of free African Americans all the way from the first census in 1790 through the last federal census that was taken before emancipation in 1860. And as you can see, of course, we're adding states each decade, but you see the population of free people of color increasing with each decade's enumeration. And the thing that I always like to point out is that there are always more free people of color in the South than in the North. So if you just take a minute, you'll see, we started with 27,000 in the North, 32,000 in the South from the very beginning of census enumeration. And this goes on to increase very well over the years. And then you get to 1860, where you see now that over 500,000 of people in America are free people of color, with the South still beating out the North significantly in numbers. And so this kind of busts the myth for a lot of people that, free people of color only lived in the North. That was absolutely not true. Now, in Virginia and North Carolina, here's how the numbers looked in 1860. And again, this is the last time that these numbers were denoted for this population, because in 1865, emancipation took place, or full emancipation. So here in Virginia, where I live, there were 58,042 free people of color in the 1860 census. And in North Carolina, a significantly lower number, but it was also a smaller population, having only 30,463. Now, what exactly did it mean to be a free person of color? Free persons of color were people of African descent who were often mixed with European and/or native blood who were not enslaved. You'll find them in records mentioned as free Negroes, free Blacks, or gens de couleur libre in some areas, especially around Louisiana and some areas of Mississippi, where you had a big influx of French-speaking and French native people mixing with Blacks and Native Americans. By law, the child of a free mother was always born free. It didn't matter what the race or the status of the father was. And so because of this, many free people of color had female Indian ancestry. They were born to female Native American people. Now, how exactly did free people of color become free? Well, as already mentioned, they may have been born free due to the condition of their mother. So they could have been born to a white mother, born to a Native American mother, or born to a Black mother who was already free. They could have been manumitted by a previous enslaver, or they may have purchased their own freedom from an enslaver, or they could have been purchased by a family member. And I always like to make sure to stop here and remind everyone that yes, you will find Blacks who are slave owners in the different census records and court records and whatnot. And sometimes, but not often, those Black slave owners have actually enslaved people for the free labor. But more often than not, these are people who have purchased their family members. They have purchased their wife or their children or their parents to get them out of bondage from a white enslaver. And because of the laws about in different locations for manumission and the cost of being able to manumit someone, they may be recorded at whatever time you're looking at a record as still having owned their family member. But most of the time, these are not situations where someone is living as enslaved by that family member. They're, just living as a family. You also have persons who were released after a period of indentured servitude, and some of those indentured servants were people of color. You have immigrants who came over from Europe with a colonist, and they were never enslaved. They may have been indentured, or they may have just been workers on the ship or whatever that brought them over, and they stayed here too. And then you have war veterans who may have gotten their freedom because they participated in the Revolutionary War or the War of 1812 or even the Civil War. And I'm sorry that because I'm a co-host, all the things keep popping up, and so my slides are not, my clicks are not going to my slides the way I want them to. And then you have another set of persons who kind of are a different category of free. You have runaway slaves, or you may call them fugitive slaves, who have taken their own freedom in their own hands. And so they may not be officially free, but they are living as free wherever they have run to. You have Civil War contraband, who after 1863 crossed into Union lines during the Civil War. And once they did so, they were considered contraband of war and were no longer enslaved. And then you have people called, referred to as unofficially free. And these are people who are still enslaved officially, but their enslaver allows them to live separately, to earn their own living. These are often skilled laborers like blacksmiths and carpenters who earn their own money or are given maybe a patch of land or a garden, or in some cases, they don't even live on the same property with their enslaver, and they're known in the community as though, they were free people and no one bothers them. So those people are referred to as unofficially free. Now, I'm going to try again to see if I can get this floating thing out of my way. Okay, so once upon a time, free people of color had many of the same rights as white people did. They had the right to bear arms. They were involved in property transactions, buying and selling property and renting out property. They were entrepreneurs with their own businesses. In most areas, they were able to vote at some point in history. They were allowed to testify in court and to participate in juries or on juries. But even though they had these rights, there were always kind of like unofficial restrictions before the restrictions became legalized. They also had the right to an education. They had the opportunity to learn to read and to write, And this was achieved in many different ways. Some free people of color learned through their churches and other religious organizations. Some were taught through their employers because they needed the skills to be able to read, to write, and to figure in order to do the jobs that they were doing. Many were taught by apprentice masters to read and write, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. Some had private tutors, and in many cases, free people of color were self-taught. And they worked, a lot with the Bible and with primers to help themselves learn to read and write. But even though they were free, were they really free? Now, from the time the first colonists came to this new world, there were people of African descent. We already talked about that. These were free people, although in some cases they were indentured. And prior to the 19th century, there were very few color-based restrictions in America. Instead, the social structures were more class-based. It mattered if you were wealthy or poor, or if you were indentured or enslaved. People of all races owned land and business, and there were even mixed race marriages and relationships, which, although I'm not going to make it sound like it was gravy, they weren't as problematic as they eventually became. But throughout the 19th century, as the population of free people of color increased, so did the number and severity of legal restrictions that were imposed upon them. So what caused these changes? Well, there were several slave rebellions and insurrections that began to take place across the South in different areas, but there were two major ones that really made the difference, especially in Virginia, or for Virginia and North Carolina. The first of which is Gabriel's Rebellion. Now, you might want to turn your volume up to make sure you're going to hear this, but let's listen about Gabriel's Rebellion. Gabriel's Rebellion. Gabriel, a slave of Thomas Prosper. Oh, sorry, it's me trying to get those controls away again. Of Brookfield Plantation, planned a slave insurrection against Richmond on August 30th, 1800. The slaves intended to kidnap Governor James Monroe and compel him to support political, social, and economic equality. But intense rains delayed the insurgent scheme. Mosby Shepherd of Meadow Farm, informed of the plot by family slaves Tom and Pharaoh, dispatched a warning letter to the governor. Monroe called out the militia, and Gabriel, his plans foiled, fled to Norfolk. Authorities there captured and returned him to Richmond. Convicted of conspiracy, Gabriel was hanged on October 10, 1800, the last of 26 conspirators executed. So even though Gabriel's plan failed, it was a big warning to enslavers and planters and jailers around that this was a possibility, that they needed to kind of put some more restrictions on people of color, because they were basically starting to feel themselves, in their opinion. And then, so you begin to start seeing some of these laws put into place just after Gabriel's Rebellion. But then things got even tighter after Nat Turner's insurrection in Southampton County, Virginia. Nat Turner's Rebellion, which is also known as the Southampton Insurrection, was a slave rebellion that took place in Southampton County, Virginia during August 1831. Led by Nat Turner, rebel slaves killed from 55 to 65 people, the largest and deadliest slave uprising in United States history. The rebellion was put down within a few days, but Turner survived in hiding for more than 2 months afterwards. The rebellion was effectively suppressed at Belmont Plantation on the morning of August 23, 1831. So things definitely began to change here in Virginia and in the state of North Carolina after these two incidents. Gabriel's Rebellion. New laws began to be put in place in both states. One of the laws that straddled the states was an increase on bond amounts required to manumit slaves. As I mentioned earlier, it costs something to free your slaves. So a lot of people think, well, why didn't he just free them? Why didn't she just free them? But enslavers had to pay a bond to free their slaves, and this amount, after Gabriel's rebellion or failed rebellion, went up significantly. In North Carolina, a petition now would be required in order to manumit an enslaved person with 6 weeks advance public notice. And any manumitted person then had to leave the state of North Carolina within 90 days and never return. Now, if they did return and they were caught, they could be enslaved on the spot. In Virginia, any emancipation granted to slave or slaves, to any slave or slaves, as herein directed by the law that was enacted, would be upon the express condition that he, she, or they would leave the state within 90 days from the granting thereof and never return within the state afterwards. Emancipated slaves not leaving the state or returning were to be arrested and sold, and the proceeds would be equally divided between the informant and the county wardens of the poor. In North Carolina, the once held right to bear arms, to own guns, was taken away. It was a gradual situation where at first they were able to petition to the court to find out if they could be allowed to continue to bear arms. So here we have 2 examples from Franklin County, North Carolina, both of which are from September of 1858. The first one says, ordered that Simon Dunstan, a free man of color, be allowed to carry a gun for 1 year. They would give them the 1 year permission, and they would have to come back each year to renew that. And then under that, ordered that Thomas Blacknell, a free man of color, be allowed to carry firearms for 1 year from this term of court. And just as an aside, Thomas Blacknell is a known enslaver, a man of color who did enslave other Black people for the free labor. But in 1861, the county courts were prohibited from granting these licenses to free Blacks under any circumstances. Voting rights. Now, initially here in America, any man who owned land was able to vote, period. Didn't matter what your race was. If you were a landowner, you could vote. But then we were introduced to the concept of states' rights. And so the decision was able to be made state by state who could vote, and you do start to see restrictions or limitations being put on the rights of Blacks to vote. But in 1790, the Naturalized Citizens Act was passed, and this act determined that only immigrants who had been naturalized would be able to vote. And so, of course, you know that our enslaved ancestors were not naturalized, as were most of the other persons of color who were born here. And so this is where you really began to see people of color no longer being able to vote. Interestingly enough, well, Virginia first, the colonial legislature moved to abolish voting rights for free Negroes and Indians as far back as 1723. So some states, you know, did better than others. But in North Carolina, they were actually the last holdout, which is interesting to me. Free men of color were considered citizens of North Carolina and were able to vote all the way up until 1835. And so at that point, the Constitution was amended to restrict voting privileges to white men only. So, we saw some examples of laws put in place for free Negroes or emancipated Negroes, those who have been manumitted, having to leave the state. But there were also laws put into place regarding free Negroes being in the state in general. So in Virginia, you can see this 1826 law, no free Negro is to migrate into the state. If there's come here and they're still present in 20 days after they've been notified to remove from the state, they'd be held to labor for 10 years or pay $500. This law also applied to any free Negroes who were residents of the state of Virginia, but who had left the state for 3 months and tried to come back. In North Carolina, if any free Negro or person of color who may be a resident of this state shall migrate from this state and go into another state and shall be absent again for 90 days or more, it shall not be lawful for such free Negro or person of color to return to this state. And if any free Negro or person of color shall violate this section, he shall be liable to the same penalties as are prescribed for the punishment of free Negroes and persons of color who migrate to this state. So, you can see what's happening here. They really don't want free people of color to be in the state. So they're like, if you're here, you better stay here. If you leave, don't try to come back. So here's an example of a certificate that was given to a woman, Harriet Bowling or Bolling. It's going to give her full description. She's 5'9.5", same height I am, 42 years old, mulatto, some small dark spots or splotches on each of her cheeks, a scar on her left wrist occasioned by a cut. And it's showing here that she was emancipated by her enslaver, James Bolling, in 1842. And she's now permitted, because she petitioned to be able to stay in the state, she's permitted by the court to remain in the Commonwealth and to reside in Petersburg, Virginia. And this is the process that anyone would have to go to if they wanted to try to get around these laws that were made to either say that you were freed and you have to leave, or you left and you came back and you can't stay. So they would have to do petitions. And I'm showing you this because these petitions are some of the best documents that you can use in your research to try to find documentation of the lives of free people of color. Another law that was put in place in Virginia in 1858, free people of color could not buy wine or ardent spirits unless they had written permission from 3 or more justices that they were sober, orderly, and of good character. In North Carolina, if any free Negro or mulatto shall trade with any slave, either by buying from or selling to him or her any article of property prohibited to be sold to or bought from a slave by any white free person, by the laws of this state, he or she may be presented by indictment in the county or superior court. So that's telling you where to look for the records. And on conviction, shall receive not less than 39 lashes on his or her bare back. And the document that you see on the left is actually for a Negro man named Charn, a free man of color. That is my 3rd great-grandfather, Charnton Hill. And he was arrested for trading with an enslaved person. He was a free person of color. So no, freedom wasn't free. Life for free people of color was no crystal stair. But the thing that they had going for them that enslaved persons didn't was that they had at least some degree of agency over their own lives and choices. The restrictions on their freedom, although they're painstaking to learn about, provide us with a body of written and sometimes pictorial evidence which allows today's researchers to document the lives of these ancestors who, like and adjacent to the enslaved, struggled, fought, and persevered through challenging circumstances so that their descendants can be here today. And so we now turn to the records and we look at some of the types of information that has been left for us to be able to actually document the lives of free people of color. So first and foremost, people of color were required in many states to register proof of their free status with the county government. Now, I will tell you that this was much more prevalent in Virginia than in North Carolina, but you will find it in both states. This documentation could take the form of copies of manumission papers, certificates of freedom, court records, or in some places, like you see on the right, a freedom badge. Now, in Virginia, the General Assembly passed legislation to register all free Negroes and mulattoes in the Commonwealth with the clerk of the county court. This created a numbered register, and it recorded the name, age, color, status of emancipation if they were not born free, and by whom they were emancipated, and in which county court the registered Negro had been freed. Free Negroes and mulattoes were to re-register every 3 years. Unregistered free Negroes could be jailed as runaway slaves. So here is an example from Nelson County, Virginia, and we're going to take a look at it. Without proof of their free status, these persons risked abduction and enslavement. These documents and artifacts not only provided protection for the free Blacks, but they were also a way of preventing enslaved individuals from passing as free people. So here you see an example where Samuel Mayo has come in on the 11th of May in 1860. He's 26 years old. He's 6'1" in stature and light mulatto. He has a long scar on the knuckle of his left forefinger. Yes, it's that specific. And the little finger on the same hand. He's stiff and crooked, has a small scar over his right eye. He was free-born in Nelson County, and his fee has been paid because nothing is free. So they also have to pay a fee, just like you pay to register your car, they have to pay to register themselves. And so you see similar notations for Mary Jane Dunning and for Mary Jane Sorrell on this same page. You also will find these same types of registers where it's written more in a paragraph form. And the reason I really wanted to share this, and I really wish I could get this thing out of my way, is because this particular example that I'm showing you here, it is from Georgia. But it is showing you examples, or excuse me, giving you information about people who are born or who are from Virginia and North Carolina. So you never should limit your searches to just one state or one location. Make sure that your searches are tight, that you're using those surnames and you're using, if you know what kind of occupation the person had, or if you have a birth year, or if you only have a first name, apply those searches broadly and then bring yourself in. So here we have someone, remember these are Georgia records. This person is from the state of Virginia. This one is from Virginia. This one is from North Carolina, North Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Virginia, and Virginia. And this is just on one image. So actually there's only one person on this whole image who was born in Georgia. It is also really important that you know the law. Now you can read law books to find the law, you can Google the laws, but I also encourage you to use the newspapers, because every time any new law was passed, it's going to be in the newspaper. And these restrictive laws, they got tighter and tighter and tighter, like you're squeezing a noose around someone's neck. But they also would typically announce when permits were being given, when they had been allowed to stay. And that's what you see here. Free persons of color were granted permits of residence to orderly free persons of color who had produced satisfactory testimonials of good character. So you can look for that kind of thing too, to support what you're learning about the law. And then here's another type of thing where you will find many free people of color. They, for some reason, a lot of them lost their papers, and you see lots of ads saying so-and-so lost his free papers, and therefore they were arrested, just as we just learned they would be, and committed to prison. And for there, they're typically going to be sold into slavery. Another thing about these laws and restrictions is it caused free people of color to have a lot of interactions with the courts, because they may have been either breaking these laws or petitioning to get around them. So you want to study court records, even if they're not categorized for free people of color. You just need to jump on Family Search or wherever and start browsing or reading through the court records for whatever location you're interested in. So I have two examples here, one from North Carolina in 1833, Granville County. 37 residents of Granville County are petitioning to allow Admiral Dunstan, a free man of color from Mecklenburg County, Virginia, and he's a wheelwright and property owner in Virginia, but he married someone from Granville County, and they want to make their home in Granville County. But remember, North Carolina law said that no free person could move into North Carolina from another state. So they're petitioning to allow this Admiral Dunstan to be able to move into Granville County. And I can tell you that it did pass. And then the other one from Virginia in 1823, Fluvanna County, you have Anna Shelton, a slave owned by John Ashland, married Peyton Shelton, a free man of color. A lot of people don't know that enslaved persons did marry with free persons of color. And he purchased and emancipated her. Now she discovers by law that she must leave her husband, her home, and her friends. She seeks permission to remain in Virginia. So again, he emancipated her, so the law says she has to go within 90 days. So she's petitioning the court to be able to stay. I've already briefly mentioned newspapers, but on a broader level, you want to do newspaper searches for free people of color, because you will find them throughout the newspapers doing all the regular stuff that white people do. So when you're searching for them, you want to use terms such as free man, free woman, free person of color, free Black, free Negro, and and you will get all kinds of results showing you how free people of color were living. Here we have a situation, where there's a suit, because they were allowed to bring suits and have suits brought against them. We have a trustee sale, and we have just a news article about a free woman of color who was burnt, unfortunately, in a fire. And I will say that there are many times with persons of color that you will see articles about them like this one, and they won't be named, unfortunately. All right, bastardy bonds. This is another record type where you're going to find free people of color. The purpose of bastardy bonds was to place the responsibility of support for an illegitimate child upon the father, should the mother be or become unable to provide proper support. Otherwise, the child would become a ward of the county poorhouse, which would be an expense to the county And they really didn't go for that back then. Like anything that would be an expense to the city or the county there would be an attempt or a law put in place to try to prevent that. So to explain bastardy bonds, there was kind of like a step-by-step process that you had to go through. So first, the pregnancy of a woman or the birth of a child would be made known to the county court. Next, a warrant would be issued for the woman to be brought into court. Now, this is if she did not come forth herself to file the bond. The woman would be examined, not physically, just means questioned, under oath and asked to declare the name of the child's father. And then the reputed father was served a warrant and required to post bond. Now, if the woman refused to name the father, she or some other interested party would post the bond, and sometimes the mother and father actually did come in and post the bond together. If the woman refused to post the bond or to declare the father, then she would often be sent to jail. So this is an example of a transcription that's done on the Tyrrell County, North Carolina Gen website. And it's showing this reputed father, Joseph Gibson, who we actually have a picture of, and it's showing the process happening that the woman, Keziah Merritt, she's single, she's with child at this time, and she's coming in, and then there's the appearance bond and all the, mention of things I just kind of went over. It's often very helpful to see who paid the bond, because that can lead you to additional family members, friends, neighbors, or associates that can always bring you to more records about the person you're actually researching. And then this last picture down here, it just shows you all of the interactions with the court that Joseph Gibson had to have to go through this process. And each one of those interactions creates a record for you to find as a researcher. And then I just wanted to show you that the actual bastardy bond, I don't expect you to be able to read this, is usually a handwritten document. And so it's going to give you all the information you need, typically about, the mother's name, the father's name, if the mother's big with child, or if the child has already been born, then it may give you a birth date, which can also be very helpful. And so when you're looking at the actual records, it's going to look like this, not like the typewritten transcription. Apprentice records. This is also an area where you're going to find many, many free people of color. I'm using North Carolina as an example, but each state had its own laws in place for the binding out of apprentices. In North Carolina, all free base-born children, including children of color, were to be apprenticed. That was the state law. All minor children whose fathers deserted their families and had been absent for 1 year were to be apprenticed. All orphans whose estates were so small that they would not cover the child's education and maintenance. Any child for whom application was made to the wardens of the poor. And then for this presentation, all free Negroes and mulattoes where the parents of such children were not gainfully employed. So you can see that that is very subjective there, because who decides if your employment is gainful or not? And I did want to mention here where it says orphans. Orphan just typically means the father is no longer there. Because mothers were not expected to support the family. So if your father dies or your father leaves, you're considered an orphan. So in North Carolina, the law required apprentices to be taught to read and write. Interestingly enough, a law was put in place in Virginia that made teaching free children or Black children to read or write who were apprenticed. It became illegal in Virginia, I'm sorry. So apprentice bonds also could be handwritten, like you see on the left, or written on pre-printed forms with the information just filled in. Either way, it's going to give you good genealogical information. And the same Gen website, the same person did all of these transcriptions. So you're able to go in and see this type of information. You can see here, this is my third great grandfather that you saw the document for trading with enslaved people. He was born in 1794. So when he was 6 years old in 1800, he was apprenticed to a man named Laban Heyman, as was his sister, Morning Hill. And they were supposed to have been taught a specific trade or skill, but for some reason they were not. And that, to me, is perhaps an indicator that there may be a family relationship with them, but I have not been able to find that out yet. But you can see down here all the rest, most of them, except him again, have some kind of a trade or skill being taught. But look at the information you get from these bonds. For George Clark, he's an orphan boy. That lets you know his father at least has been deceased or gone. He's 5 years and 10 months old on this date. So you're able to figure a birth, an approximate birth date for him. With my own third great grandfather, the fact that it says he's mulatto, she's mulatto, that gives me information because I know that their mother was white. So that lets me know that their father was a person of color. And here again, Clem McCabe, orphan son of Elizabeth McCabe or Maccabee. So I know what this child's mother's name was. And when you go into the record, you actually get even more information. So never depend just on the transcription. Let it just be a hint for you. So in Virginia in 1765, the legislature passed a law decreeing that illegitimate children of women servants and Negroes, or those of free Christian white women by Negroes, were to be bound out. The boys were to serve until they reached the age of 21, the girls until they were 18. In the first decade of the 19th century, overseers of the poor were forbidden to bind out any Black or mulatto orphan to a master that would teach his apprentice reading, writing, or arithmetic. So sorry, that was what I just talked about. Church records is another wonderful, wonderful, wonderful resource for finding information about all people of color, free or enslaved. I have two examples here for you. In 1858, the one at the top, the door of the church was opened for the reception of members. Thereupon, Richard Dunstan, a free man of color, was received by experience for baptism, and this is in North Carolina. And the one at the bottom, Oscar Alston, a free man of color who has been set off from the church and has received from the clerk a certificate to show the conduct he was cut off for, in which he was not satisfied. And because he's a free man, he actually complained to the church and said he did not think it was a correct statement, but the church approved of the statement and ordered it to be filed away with the papers. Military records are another wonderful resource for finding free persons of color or persons who have self-emancipated, as we talked about in the beginning of the presentation. So you'll always be able to find enlistment and service records for anyone who served in the military. If they applied for a pension, you should be able to find that application and the files that accompany it. And if the ancestor was a United States colored troop soldier during the Civil War, you should also be able to find this information for them. Just this sleeve, the outer sleeve of a service record, gives you a ton of information, even if you don't find anything else. This is Caesar Godley. This was an ancestor of a client of mine who had been enslaved. You get his company and regiment, you get his age, his height, complexion, general description, where he was born. That's the word born right there. So that's valuable genealogical information. His occupation, laborer, that's like a code word for saying he was formerly enslaved. and then it tells you where he enlisted and gives some information about his service. You also will find volunteer enlistment forms for typically the same people. And so that's going to give you even more information. Some of the information will be repeated and some of it will be new. Oh, I'm sorry, I took the depositions out and I forgot to replace them, but I'll just say that these were from other states and I meant to replace them and I guess I forgot. But with the pension files, you will get depositions made not only by the person requesting the pension, but by their friends, by their family members, by their spouses. And so all of those depositions are going to give you more and more information, not only about the person who was in the military, but also about the community that they came from. And then don't forget scholarly works. There are so many journals and articles, dissertations, books, everything that are written about free people of color. These are just some examples that you see on the screen, but I will mention specifically the work of Paul Heinig. If you're not familiar with it already, he has a 6-volume set of work just dedicated to free families from North Carolina, Virginia, and South Carolina. And then Warren Miltier, who has North Carolina's Free People of Color 1715 to 1885. If you had family that was free in North Carolina or Virginia, you need to get both of these. And Heinig's book is available online at freeafricanamericans.com. So to recap, free people of color, African ancestor people have been in the United States since the first colonists arrived. The first people of color in this land were Native Americans. In many areas, Blacks and Native people intermingled, thus producing descendants of mixed ancestry. As the number of free people of color increased and because of brave attempts of enslaved individuals to break away from bondage, laws were enacted to restrict the lives of free people of color, and most especially to instill fear in the enslaved. So life for free people of color was no crystal stair, but the laws designed to control them created documents that are valuable to researchers, many of which are held in court records. In addition, military records, newspapers, and scholarly works help to reveal the stories of free people of color in the antebellum South. So I thank you very much for your time and attention. I appreciate your patience as I'm a tired presenter tonight. These are the ways that you can find me and contact me. I have 2 blogs, as Juwan mentioned earlier. You're welcome to take a screenshot here if you'd like. You can email me at yarsan@aol.com. You'll find me on Twitter as Nada Sue and Facebook, Renate Yarborough Sanders, with the hyphen, please, for that particular account. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Renata. Let's send some virtual love for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much. You know, I'm exhausted.
I know.
For those that don't know, I taught 2 classes in the Maggie Institute just before this. So you're getting a very tired Renata. My voice is tired. So thank you for bearing with me.
Well, thank you so much for your wonderful, insightful presentation, as it always is. We have some questions. So if you're up for that, I'll be happy to ask those. I have them here. Let's start with the first one from Brittany. She wants to know, what does it mean to be a naturalized citizen in the context of this topic?
So it's still the same as what it means today, is that you make an oath of allegiance to this country to become a citizen of this country and to follow the rules and laws of this country.
Thank you.
And you've come from somewhere else, so you're an immigrant.
Correct.
Which everyone is or was, except Native Americans. So, yes, sorry.
No, you're fine. Thanks for that context. Alicia Gant, where did you find the petitions to stay in the state of Virginia? I'm assuming.
Everything that I mentioned for Virginia, you're going to want to go to the Library of Virginia website, to the Virginia Memory Project or Virginia Untold. If you see Virginia Untold first, click on that. If you see Virginia Memory first, click on that and it'll take you to Virginia Untold. So it's kind of one-stop shopping for the state of Virginia. For North Carolina, you have a few options, but I would first send you to the Digital Library on American Slavery, which is DLAS.org, I believe. And you will find petitions there for all states, but you'll find them for North Carolina and you'll find them for several other states. I am a proponent of reading through the court records for myself because I haven't found any digitization project that has caught every single thing in the category that they're looking for, because we don't have categories. You're reading court records and you find this about that and this about that and this about that, and you know that it wasn't included in so-and-so's project where they were pulling marriage records or whatever. So I spend a lot of time on Family Search, just reading through the court records, looking for examples of the type of records that will help me in my research.
All right. That's a question from Tom Brown. In 1794, a North Carolina slaveholder willed that his 6 slaves be freed and inherit land. The eldest male received both. By 1816, the remaining were emancipated, but not allowed to inherit land. When did the North Carolina law change, forbidding emancipated to inherit land?
I would have to look that up. I don't know the years for the laws. I apologize.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to look that up. Sorry.
Okay. That's fine. Fran says, with a number of Virginia counties falling under the category of burn counties, is it still possible to retrieve information relative to free Blacks? If so, what is the best resource to locate this information?
For Virginia, I would go to Virginia Untold, but I would also go to those counties. Mm-hmm. I would make a phone call to those counties to find out what they have, but also I would use the Family Search Wiki. They have a wiki for everything. And so just go to familysearch.org/wiki and whatever your topic is that you're looking for, and they're going to have a wiki for it. Also, Cindy's List, I would also recommend checking Cindy's List. But this is another example. I mean, I just can't tell you how many and the variety of types of records that I run into just from sitting and reading through the court records on Family Search. And also remember that I mentioned church records because they fill in the gap for a lot of other types of records that may have been burned in a fire or may have not been yet mandated by whatever state you're looking at, like birth records, marriage, and death. You're going to find them often in church records. So just all those different record types that I just showed you, they will fill in the gaps, but you have to do the work. It's if you're a newer researcher and you're kind of used to just being able to put something in online and do a search, that's not going to bring you to, less than 20% of what's available is actually online. And an even smaller number or smaller percentage of that is digitized and indexed to come up in a search. So you just got to spend time reading through those records and just be patient about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was also going to offer that the Library of Virginia, they have microfilm register of free Negroes, particularly for York County and other counties. So you may want to visit the city and county records on the Library of Virginia to look and see what records each county may have as it relates to free persons.
Absolutely. And even for North Carolina, if you go on the state website, State Archives website, They do have a county by county index that will let you know what is available there by county too.
We have this question from Tom Brown, Seth Cox book, Lethal State, A History of the Death Penalty in North Carolina, gives demographics post 1860. Are there North Carolina county studies showing how the death penalty was applied to free people of color pre-1860?
You know, Tom Brown is asking some tough questions. Again, you know, that's a really broad question. I would do a Google search to find out if there has been a publication. That's not something I've had to look for, so I can't say. I would also check those scholarly resources to see if someone may have done a dissertation or written an article on something like that. And if he's a member of the North Carolina Genealogical Society, he can also search their journal all the way back to 1975, I believe it is. And it's possible that someone could have done an article about that there.
Okay. Right. And Dane has a question. Is the Oscar Alston Church record an example from North Carolina?
Yes, that was from Tanner's Creek Baptist Church in Warren County, North Carolina. And if he wants an exact a link to it, he can email me at yarsan@aol.com and I can get that to him.
Okay. And Angela Bell said, how do you find military information on free Negroes?
Hello, cousin Angela Bell. Thank you for being here. So the military information is not going to be separated by, you know, free or were they enslaved. There's so many different places to find it, but the quickest place if you're trying to do it online would be Fold 3, which is a subscription website through Ancestry, or the NARA, National Archives and Record Administration. Even if they don't have the record, you know, digitized for you to see, they should have it indexed and be able to let you know if there's a record and where you can find it. And the same would be true for Fold 3, but you have to pay for Fold 3.
Okay. Tom Brown has a question about one of my favorite record sets, and probably yours as well, Freedmen Bureau. Do many free people of color appear in the Freedmen Bureau papers?
Yes, all kinds of people appear in the Freedmen's Bureau papers. I do a talk on that, as a matter of fact. It's called There's Something for Everyone. So yes, you will find free people, or people who were free before 1865. You will find people, mostly people who were enslaved, and you will find former enslavers and business people who are interacting with the freedmen. So again, it's kind of the kind of thing where you need to read through the records and look for the terminology. Although you can, so Ancestry's records are searchable, and there might be a way to put in the keyword free and see if that's gonna like just bring you to a listing of people who have that connected with their names.
Okay. This question is from Neff Hawthorne. Where did the Melogians go from North Carolina?
Melungeons?
Melogians? I don't know of that.
If she's talking about Melungeons.
Melungeons?
Oh, mulatto.
Not mulatto. Yeah, I haven't heard the Mulogions.
It sounds like she's trying to say Melungeons.
Okay.
Which we think more of in like West Virginia, Tennessee, and the western part of Virginia. So I don't have a real answer for Melungeons from North Carolina, but Neff knows how to get in touch with me. So you can clarify in an email if you need to.
All right. And another question, this is our last one, I believe. Advice for searching for participants with the Red Strings during the Civil War, the pro-union guerrilla warfare in North Carolina, Quakerville.
Is that Tom Brown again?
That's Tom Brown again, yes.
that is again not something I've ever studied, and so I don't have an answer, but I can probably connect you, Tom, to some people who may be able to answer those very specific questions. And can you just repeat that last one for me again, so I'll know who to be thinking about?
The one advice for searching for participants with the red strings.
The red strings.
Yeah, red strings.
I've never heard of the red strings.
A pro-union guerrilla warfare in North Carolina, Quaker Belt.
Oh, not up my alley, sorry. I'm not one of those people who claims to know it all. I am the furthest from that, and I've never heard of that ever before.
And Vicki Simmons has a question regarding white women giving birth to Black children. What were the implications for them, or were there any?
It would depend on where they were and what time period it was. So in colonial times, it wasn't even a big deal in most cases, because indentured servants were all in the same community with one another and were marrying one another. And, you know, in the 1600s, especially in the very, very early 1700s, it was more of a class-based situation. And so it didn't really cause an uproar at all. Later, you know, as you got it, as these laws that I started talking about started being passed, prejudices became built in, and well, with slavery being connected to skin color, that changed everything. And so, you know, that is when it started to become like a taboo thing. But at the same time, you know, I've never heard of a white woman being tarred and feathered because she had a mulatto child. So she may have been shunned, or, you know, maybe she ended up in the quarters with the slave. Like, I really don't know, but it just became a less acceptable situation as we get into the 1700s and the 1800s. But it was still happening. And it happened for a variety of reasons, because after the colonial period, it really wasn't so much about indentured servitude. The same way white men lusted after enslaved women, there were white women who lusted after enslaved men. You just don't hear about it as much.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all. Thank you everyone for participating tonight. We look forward to you being at our next, our final Sankofa Series workshop with Tim Pinnock on historic African-American newspapers next month. And so again, thank you so much for joining us. Renate, I hope your voice recovers, as I'm sure you have another speaking engagement coming up. But again, thank you all as always for your graciousness and your generosity in sharing with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And Tom Brown, I'm sorry I couldn't do you justice, but please reach out to me and I'll connect you with the right people. And everybody just enjoy your evening, and I wish everybody the best in your research endeavors. Thank you so much. Let me save the chat. Also saw I had not only Angela Bell, but my cousin, one of my Felton cousins was here from out in Montana. I think it was Larry, it might've been Jim, but thank you, Felton cousin, if you're still on here, for coming.